I recently just watched the entire RoboCop franchise for the very first time back to back to back, so today I am going to be ranking all 4 of the RoboCop movies we've had up until this point, from the worst to the best. Before we get started, I want to hear your guys' list as well, so make sure that you leave your ranking of the RoboCop films down in the comments below. I'd love to see all your rankings. Tell me if you'd buy that for $1, and let's just get started.
I'd buy that for $1.
In last place, RoboCop 3. RoboCop 3 misses the mark on everything that made the first 2 entries in the franchise work, and it does not take long until you realize the issues.
You called for backup?
Firstly, Peter Weller, the original RoboCop, you know, the guy who has the face of RoboCop, is not in this movie. He did not return. Apparently, there was scheduling conflicts with him in another movie that he was doing at the time, so they got a new actor in the role of RoboCop, now played by Robert John Burke. And while Burke isn't necessarily a bad choice for the replacement, you can tell that this performance, it just doesn't match the RoboCop from the first 2 movies. Script-wise or performance-wise, there's just this detachment to the character. First of all, he's way too chatty. RoboCop always had a deadpan humor in the original movies that Peter Weller so excellently executed in the dialogue. Robert John Burke in this movie feels like he's trying to make you laugh. He's trying to do jokes. He's trying to do quips. It's not deadpan. It's an actual attempt at being funny, and it just doesn't feel like RoboCop in the past. For the majority of the movie, it's just eye-rolling and it's awkward, and you just kind of want him to shut up.
We're under arrest for assaulting an officer and destruction of police property.
The next thing you notice right off the bat about this movie is it is not R-rated, it is PG-13, and so all the blood and the gore that made the first 2 RoboCop's actions so much fun and pulpy is completely missing here, which makes all the action sequences feel so hollow and sanitized and kind of cleaned up, almost like it was for the kids. Which this movie does feel like it's more intended for a younger audience. They even get rid of RoboCop's partner Lewis and replace her with a little girl that's teamed up with RoboCop for the movie. There's just something about it that feels like it's not trying to reach the same audience that the first 2 had. And in that, it kind of loses its identity. Which also brings us to the humor of RoboCop 3, because RoboCop is a very satirical franchise. It makes a bunch of jabs and jokes and commentary on corporate capitalism. It makes jokes about the media and consumerism. Those jokes feel very absent from RoboCop 3, and they're being replaced by really cartoony gags and slapsticky humor that with the first RoboCop, and even with the sequel to some extent, they were towing the line between being overly goofy and campy, but also having you kind of take the material seriously. Here, nothing can be taken seriously. It all just comes across as a farce. And that line that they were towing in the original 2 between campy and goofy, but they just go way, way into goofy, way into campy, to the point that it's just all so ridiculous.
Don't.
But aside from those issues, the movie also is just, it's a messy story, and RoboCop in the movie is oddly sidelined in his own movie. They find so many ways to take RoboCop out of the movie for large chunks of time. It honestly feels like it's deliberately getting rid of RoboCop, and you're just kind of scratching your head wondering, why did they decide to do that when it's called RoboCop 3? Plus, the effects in this one, the first 2 actually hold up decently well. Here, they are atrocious. They are so bad. By the time RoboCop is flying around at the end, you can basically see the wires, the outline of his cut up against the backdrop. It just looks terrible. RoboCop 3, it's just terrible. At number 3, we have RoboCop 2014. Now, this is obviously a remake of the 1987 original, and it takes place in the very, very far away future of 2028. It appears that the inn that the filmmakers found when making this movie was to dive deeper into aspects of the original that were kind of glossed over, that being the mechanics and the science behind the RoboCop suit, as well as the family dynamic between Alex Murphy, his wife, and his son. And these aren't bad angles to approach the material at. In fact, it does give this movie a distinct feel and makes it its own iteration of RoboCop. There's clearly an attempt to do their own thing with this property, which I appreciate, but the problem with what they decide to tackle with this is it takes all the intrigue and the mystery out of the character of Alex Murphy. They spend so much time explaining the mechanics and the science to the point that they kind of over-explain just how all of it works. And the result of that is when it comes to the scenes of the doctors working on Alex Murphy, they actually start to drag the pacing a bit for me. The family aspect of this also makes it feel more like a drama than a straightforward action movie, and there was this dramatic element to the original RoboCop, but in the original they kind of toe the line between is RoboCop Alex Murphy or not. He'll have his memories, but does he have the humanity behind it? And with the original, not to give the ranking away, but that is kind of what made it special. Whereas in this version, they decided to do the opposite and have Alex Murphy just be Alex Murphy. When he's RoboCop, he's the same person, same memories, nothing is lost. And it drains the movie of all of that intrigue and mystery surrounding RoboCop that they did so well in the original 1987 version. But really the worst part about the family aspect in this movie is the fact that the characters, the mother, the son, they're kind of just stock characters. They don't really contribute much to the story. The mother's just kind of there to cry, and the boy's just kind of there to show that RoboCop's a dad. He doesn't really do anything. So even that emotional connection, that drama that they're trying to reach us with, it doesn't really land all that well for me. Even the RoboCop sequences in this movie, they're kind of bland. They just have that generic 2014, this could be any sci-fi movie from that era look to them. There's no personality infused into this movie with the RoboCop sequences. And judging this on its own merits, it's not necessarily that bad of a movie. It's just a generic one. It's just so forgettable. And yeah, there's some fun action sequences in here. I appreciate them trying to take this in a different direction, trying to do their own thing with RoboCop. But for me, doing everything opposite to what the original did just didn't really make it work anymore. Our runner-up at number 2 is RoboCop 2.
Ready for duty, partner?
Nothing I'd rather do.
As far as a sequel for RoboCop goes, this was a fine continuation of that story. It does attempt to further develop the theme of exploring RoboCop's humanity and toying with that question, is Murphy more machine than man? They try to do this by including more with RoboCop's wife, but at the same time, they kind of just drop that right off the bat. As soon as it's introduced, it's almost immediately forgotten about for the rest of the movie.
It's cold.
They made this to honor him. Your husband is dead.
Which is a shame because you find that a lot in RoboCop 2. They'll introduce these ideas, they'll introduce these concepts that will quickly get dropped for another one, to the point that this movie just feels very unfocused when it comes to its story, when it comes to its messaging. But even with that said, I find RoboCop 2 quite enjoyable. I actually think in some aspects it's funnier than the first movie.
Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
He's dead, Murphy.
You have the right to an attorney.
You're reading Miranda to a corpse.
I'm having trouble.
It does do a little bit more goofier and slapsticky gags, but it never loses its central satirical humor that was established in the original. There's still a bunch of blood squibs to be going around, and when you get to the third act and it's RoboCop versus RoboCop 2, it's a decent action set piece, and while it does kind of go on a little bit too long, I find a lot of enjoyment within it. Like I said, at times the story can feel very unfocused. It's also a little bit more cynical and mean-spirited than the first one. I know. They literally blow a guy to pieces and stick him in a robot suit in the first one, and yet somehow this one feels a little bit more nihilistic. The main antagonist using and exploiting a child in this movie doesn't really sit all that well with me. I think it's kind of a little bit too far, which you could argue just means that what the filmmakers want me to feel is coming across through the performance and through the story. But even with all that said, as far as what could you do with a RoboCop sequel, this one does a decent enough of a job continuing the story, continuing the themes and the elements that are so beloved about the original, that even though I still don't like it all that much, it's coming in at number 2 because I guess this franchise just really went off the rails after the original, which brings us to number 1. And number 1 is, of course, going to be the 1987 original, RoboCop. This movie just works on so many levels. As a satirical look into corporate capitalism, into the media coverage, into consumerism, by having all these commercials just injected throughout the movie is hilarious. Every single piece of media that they infuse into this movie is so funny.
This is Media Break. You give us 3 minutes, and we'll give you the world.
You haven't dismantled your MX stockpile.
Pakistan is threatening my border!
That's it, Buster. No more military aid. Nuke 'em. Get them before they get you. Another quality home game from Butler Brothers.
And it doesn't feel like these scenes should work with the rest of the movie, but they use these media coverages and these commercials, these absurd commercials, to further build the world building as well as establish their satire. And it just works to further deliver the message that the film is trying to get across. On top of that, as an action movie, it is tons of fun. There is no lack of blood and blood squips and body parts getting blown off and explosions going on. And while sometimes the gore does get overly kind of gross and exaggerated with the makeup effects that can look grosser than others at times. The practical effects in this movie work so well to not only ground the story in a reality, make you buy into what's happening, but also gives the movie so much personality and such a distinct look. And even almost 40 years later, they hold up pretty well. The matte paintings, the animatronics, the makeup effects, the stop motion, most of it still looks pretty good today. But what really works for me with the original RoboCop is Alex Murphy / RoboCop's journey. Because the hero's journey of RoboCop to me never fails to stay intriguing. They set up Alex Murphy at the beginning of the film with so much sympathy that while he goes on to be RoboCop and try to rediscover his humanity, the film has you behind the character all the way. And in some ways, this is actually a really great comic book movie, not based on a comic book, but the way that the story plays out, you could view this as a superhero origin story. We meet the character, we see how they get their powers, for lack of better word. We even see them go off and be vigilantes and take down low-life crime as RoboCop goes on to become the hero of the city. All of the villains in this are also a ton of fun. They're so evil, especially the main antagonist, Clarence, played by Red Foreman himself, Kurtwood Smith, who is just having so much fun in this role. Every time he's on screen, you just love to hate him.
See, I got this problem. Cops don't like me, so I don't like cops.
The visuals are also just so cool in this movie. There are so many moments where I'm just like, that was awesome. That is great. RoboCop is just a timeless sci-fi classic that has a ton of intrigue, so many interesting messages that still hold up and are relevant to today, while also being tons of fun, knowing exactly what it wants to be, accomplishing everything it sets out to do in A+ fashion. For that reason, it is easily the best the franchise has ever had to offer, and it comes in at number 1.
I'd buy that for $1.
Anyway, guys, those are all my thoughts and opinions and ranking of the 4 RoboCop movies we've had up until this point. What do you guys think of the RoboCop franchise? Do you love it? Do you hate it? How would you rank them? Comment down below and let me know all your thoughts and opinions about these movies, guys. I'd love to hear them. And if you're new here and you haven't heard, we have a goal on this channel. We want to hit 4,000 subscribers before the end of the year. If you like talking about RoboCop movies from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and now, we talk about it all on this channel. Consider hitting that subscribe button before you make your way out. As always, guys, thank you so much for hearing me out, and I hope to talk to you guys again real soon.